Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Holmes. I'm the author of Black Inventors Crafting Over 200 Years of Success. First, we have to give thanks to Carter G. Woodson and the Association for the Study of African-American Life and History, whose idea of Black history is the cornerstone of why we celebrate Black history each February and beyond. The publishing of my book involved tens of thousands of hours of research and spanned a period of 20 years. It took a long time to uncover the names of 15,000 Black men and women residing in almost all 50 states, over 70 countries, and 5 continents. There are now over 20 Black men and women who are now inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Their inventions amounts to hundreds of patents, and by my estimates alone, worth trillions of dollars. It is nothing like an idea whose time has come, and the Black inventors seized the time with their creative genius and to invent and patent their ideas. The first person we're going to be talking about is Dr. Patricia E. Bath. She was finally nominated and inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in May of 2022. She has 10 patents. She's an African-American inventor who specialized in ophthalmology and was a humanitarian. She was a pioneer in the early laser cataract surgery. Each year, millions of men and women and children receive surgery to remove cataract lenses using a laser technology. She was a pioneer in developing these devices. Andrew Jackson Beard was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. He has 7 patents. He's an African-American inventor who was a former slave, and he's responsible for developing the automatic railroad coupler, which allows railroad cars to be automatically coupled together. He was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2006. Otis Boykin, an African-American inventor, early invention improved resistors and reduced indents and resistance due to physical arrangements of wire. What does that mean? It means like your transistor radios, your tape recorders that were developed in the early 60s and 70s required using these resistors, as well as computers and missiles and satellites. George R. Carruthers, at 19 years old, he developed a special camera that was used by NASA and launched on Apollo 16 and is still currently on the moon. He was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame also. Marion Croak, might not know who she is. She has over 100 patents. She's credited with developing voice over IP. She was a vice president of the engineering at Google, previously served as a senior vice president of research and development at AT&T. She was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in May of 2022. David N. Croeth Jr. If you've ever been to New York or any of the large buildings throughout the United States, they require special air ventilation and central air conditioning and heat transfer systems. David N. Croeth Jr. was responsible for these inventions. Mark Edward Dean, National Inventor Hall of Fame, over 200 patents. What's so special about him? He developed what's called the 1 gigahertz chip. It's allowing us to do this interview today. It's responsible for banking transactions around the world, satellite communications, and the use of our phones, as well as our iPads and laptops each and every day. Charles R. Drew, National Inventors Hall of Fame inductee, 3 patents. What's so special about him? He developed what we call today blood plasma. It allows men and women and children to receive blood plasma irregardless of the blood type that they have. Dr. George Washington Carver, inducted into the National Hall of Fame, only 3 patents, but his ideas amounted to over 300 products produced from the peanut. And if you count all of the inventions that he could have possibly patented, he would have had over 1,000 patents far exceeding Thomas Edison. Lloyd Augusta Hall, all the special seasonings that we use for cooking soul food or for preparing different kinds of meals at restaurants requires us to use seasonings that don't clump together. So his patent, and he had 59 patents, was a cornerstone for us being able to use the seasonings that we use in our kitchens each and every day. Walter Lincoln Hawkins, a National Inventors Hall of Fame inductee, over 142 patents. All of the cables that allow us to do our internet calls or to use the internet as we know it today, to make overseas phone calls, requires the laying of special cables that have protective plastics around them. And Walter Lincoln Hawkins is responsible for developing those special plastics. Thomas Jennings, National Inventors Hall of Fame, one patent, 1821. His idea was to develop a special process for dry cleaning. Now, we might not think that's very important, but we all dry clean our clothes each and every day, and this man is responsible for developing that process. Fredrick McKinley Jones, National Hall of Fame inductee, over 40 patents. When you look at the trucks in our neighborhoods and around the world, there's only two types of refrigerated devices on trucks, buses, planes, and ships. And that's Thermo King, which Fredrick McKinley Jones is responsible for developing, and Carrier. It transports flowers, food, medical supplies, hundreds of different products that require special refrigeration. Fredrick McKinley Jones is responsible for developing those patents. Howard St. Clair Jones Jr., 20 patents, engineer, scientist, inventor, renowned for his work in communications, antennas, and systems. He was an independent consultant in microwave electronics, a field which he'd made significant technical contributions. Joseph Lee, when you go into a bakery or you go into a restaurant and you see that the bread that has to be made, they use a special machine for turning and churning the bread and dough. And Joseph Lee is responsible for developing those inventions. Marshall Jones, mechanical engineer, worked for General Electric, pioneer in the use of lasers for industrial materials of processing. He invented novel methods to weld dissimilar metals and developed fiber optic systems, making laser more convenient for industrial applications. So our high-speed internet that we currently use now is partly responsible because of the work and inventions by Marshall Jones. Percy Levon Julian, over 100 patents. He's an African-American who did special research in soybeans. And he is responsible for developing a natural product called phthoxamine, plus a pioneer in the industrial large-scale chemical synthesis of human hormone and testosterone from plant steroids. But also what he's known for is when we use the paints in our house today, and whether they are coal-based paint, not using any oil, soybean oil is used to make the paints that we are currently using in our homes and for industrial uses. Lewis Latimer, how can we forget about him? He's the one that developed a special filament for the electric light bulb. Edison failed a number of times in trying to develop a filament that would last a lot longer than the current one that he had developed, but it was Lewis Latimer, who had 10 patents, who developed that special filament. And Jan Mansingler, from Suriname, he developed what's called the shoe lasting machine. It revolutionized how we are able to wear so many different types of shoes. Back in the day, one person doing a shoe lasting could probably do 5 to 10 shoes in a day. With a device that Jan Mansingler developed, a good shoe laster could do 150 to 300 shoes a day, revolutionizing how shoes are manufactured around the world. And my name is, again, Keith Holmes. If you want more information about our research, you can go to our website, globalblackinventor.com. I'm also available for speaking engagements. And thank you so much for allowing me to do this presentation today.
Hello, my name is Denise Davis, and I am the co-author of Unheard Melodies. I'm the co-author with Sabrina Wilkins Richards. Unfortunately, Sabrina passed away in August of 2022, so I have to go it alone. But, I'll tell you, I met Sabrina in college at Hampton Institute, now Hampton University, in 1973. And little did we know almost 50 years ago that we would be writing a book together. She was an English major and I was a physical education major and an unlikely writer, but later on in life, I became a writer. And the idea came about for this book, Unheard Melodies, at homecoming, when a friend of ours saw an ex-boyfriend and she thought, I wonder what if I had married him instead of my husband? And we laughed and we all were talking about that kind of thing. But a few years later, Sabrina, who was suffering from a debilitating muscle disorder, said, I really wanted to write a book. And I said, oh, remember that idea that we had, or that incident that happened? Maybe we could write about that. And, she never really complained, but she said, I can't do a lot of things, but anymore, because I can't walk and I'm not mobile. But I said, you can write. And she said, you know what? I can. And so we fleshed out that idea. And of course, that idea became something completely different. But our process was for us to sit down and go through an outline for the book. And the title we came up with later on, it's Unheard Melodies, is from a John Keats poem called Ode to a Grecian Urn. And it goes, heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, ye pipes, soft pipes play on. So we use that title from that poem. Sabrina and I would meet every Wednesday. And of course, I have no concept of time. So I said, oh, it took us 2 years, but it actually took us 5 years. And we would meet on Wednesday, and we would go through our outline and our ideas. And that took about a year for us just to get the outline together. And then we started to write. And on Wednesday, sometimes we would talk, sometimes we would write, sometimes we would give assignments saying what we're going to write about. And then sometimes we wouldn't even write at all. We would just gab because we were friends. And it was a fun process. So we fleshed out the idea, and we came up with the idea of this book. It's a coming of age story about an up and coming, a rising tennis star who is from New York. And that's where I met Sabrina, because I became friends with Sabrina because she was from New York and from Queens, and my mother's from Queens. So we started with a character from New York, and her name is Darby Winwood, and she's a tennis player. She goes off to college, and she isn't a very good student, so she has to navigate through the college system. But she also learns that she's not the best player on campus, because when you come from small town or whatever, wherever you come from, and you're a star on your high school team or whatever, and you go to college, you find out that everybody else was a star. So she has to navigate through that. She goes and she learns that she has to really study, and she comes to the university with a lot of baggage. She has anxiety. She has an ex-boyfriend or a boyfriend, but when she gets to college, she kind of wants to seek out some other guys. And she almost gets kicked out of school because her grades weren't really good. So she has to learn how to study and how to navigate and study and play tennis at the same time. The tennis schedule is very grueling. And so she has to learn how to study and play tennis at the same time. She's a very strong person, but at the same time, she's very weak. Ultimately, she falls for the wrong guy, and he leads her on, and she's just running after him. But he really doesn't like her. I mean, he doesn't love her like she thinks he does. And he's really a player. So she has to deal with that, and it makes her sad. And she knows that he sees other girls, but doesn't matter. She just wants to have him. And it gets kind of messy. And I hope you read it because it's kind of juicy. And she has to learn who the real person she loves is. She also meets a lot of friends, and her friendships are tested, and she meets people from different walks of life, from different parts of the country. And that's one of the things when you go to college, you're not with people who come from where you come from. So you have to learn about different people's cultures and different people's lives in their communities. And she doesn't understand a lot of things. There's a character who is really tough, comes from the Bronx, doesn't take any mess, and Darby has to learn how to get to know her. And in turn, she has to know how to get in touch with everybody else on the hall. All of these girls live on the same dorm floor, and each one is different. And each one is struggling with their own identity and their own problems and their own family issues. And so you have all these girls coming to college with different backgrounds and different baggage. And they all have to navigate how to get along or not. And so the book really is about finding her true self. It's also about true love, finding her true love. And she finds out who really is her love and making adjustments. However, you go to school thinking, I can talk for myself, thinking that I majored in physical education. So I'm thinking I'm going to come out and I'm going to get a job teaching physical education. And I did that, but my true self wasn't in it. And I ended up becoming an artist, which I really wanted to do from the beginning. And I found my way into it. In fact, I wrote a book. I became an interior designer, and I wrote a previous book called The Spirit of African Design about African art and design. And so I went down the art path, and it's completely different from physical education. However, Sabrina was an English major, and she was a very, very good writer. In fact, I think she was a better writer than me, and she pushed me to become a better writer. She used to say, girl, can't you buy a comma once in a while? Because I always would just write run-on sentences. And but I'm a good storyteller, so her grammatical skills and my storytelling and her storytelling, because she's written a couple of things, a couple of stories, and they really came together beautifully. So our character has to deal with love, jealousy, friendship. There are some risque parts in there, and I said that, oh, Sabrina wrote all of those parts, not me. And it's an all around wild ride of fun. And if you went to college or not, but if you did go to college, some of those feelings that you have and some of those incidences that you went through in college. We used to say when we got together, and it was really a group of us who met every year. It's about 10 college friends. We met every year, and we used to say, oh, you know what? When we get together, we're 18 again. And that's what we did when we wrote this book. We went back and we put ourselves in that time of being 18, 17, 18, 19. Although we tried very hard not to put ourselves in the book, we did, we did use a lot of incidents. And I hope everybody says, oh, that was me. Well, no, it wasn't. This is totally made up, but we use a little bit of discretion in telling stories that happen in college. But I think a lot of people can relate to it, whether you went to college or not. So it's an all around wild ride, lots of ups and downs. I hope you really enjoy it. I hope you read it. And I hope that you can see yourself in it in some way. It was a very fun experience to write this book. And we had hopes of writing a sequel, but with Sabrina's passing, I'm not sure whether or not I want to go into that, but I might. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you like it, and I hope you buy it. And I hope to do many more Zoom talks and Zoom book reviews, and hope you can be right there to help me along with this book. It was a fun project. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bernice Alexander Bennett, and I am the author of The Black Homesteaders of the South. The Black Homesteaders of the South tells stories of resilience and celebrates individuals, some of whom were formerly enslaved, but were able after the emancipation to receive up to 160 acres of public land under the Homestead Act of 1862. Now, this act was signed by President Abraham Lincoln on May 20th, 1862, and it went into effect January 1st, 1863. Many African Americans were not eligible to receive land under this act until the passing of the 14th Amendment. And I mention this because some of the eligibility requirements stated that the individual had to be a citizen or have the intent to become a citizen of the United States. Also, they should not have borne any arms against the United States and be head of the family over the age of 21. Now, women, widows, formerly enslaved, and immigrants could obtain this land. They also had to live on and improve the land for a minimum of 5 years. Now, this book grew out of a project called the Black Homesteader Project, and focused and sponsored by the Homestead National Historical Park. The park was seeking descendants of homesteaders, of which I am a descendant. My ancestor received up to 159.33 acres of public land in the state of Louisiana. Now, I knew that if my ancestor received that land, others also received that land. Now, there is a project, and I mentioned the Black Homesteader Project, and stories have been on the Homestead National Historical Park with stories from the Great Plains, the colonies of the Great Plains, where there were several Black colonies. And this was spearheaded by the University of Nebraska, Lincoln Center for the Great Plains. Now, they included stories from Montana and North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, and New Mexico. Now, the Black Homesteader Program actually wanted to expand, and they reached out to me, a descendant, to see if I could then get others to write their stories. Now, we had this thought that maybe Black people did not get land, or maybe they were only sharecroppers. Well, that's not true. And this is what this book is designed to do. It's a compilation of stories from Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Mississippi, and Louisiana. These stories are written by descendants. Now, if you think of a descendant finding that land, can you imagine the feeling that they now have a homesteader in their family? We're talking about some people are finding their ancestors that were formerly enslaved. Some were in the United States colored troops. Women, as I mentioned, were eligible, and they did what they needed to do to get that land. Some people have never, ever heard about the Homestead Act of 1862, let alone knew that Black people got land. But this is the story that I want to tell you. As a genealogist, I can tell you that many stories, once the word went out that we were seeking stories for the Homestead Project, many stories emerged from the South. Yes, I was even surprised to see all of the stories that came forth from the South. And these stories were based upon land entry case files that are currently at the National Archives. Now, these files told stories about these descendants. These people that perhaps you didn't even know the records were at the National Archives. And so we're seeing stories in this book based on primary resources. Now, in each story, you will learn about when the individual settled on the land, how many acres. You will learn about their age. You will learn about what they did on the land, for example, clearing. And you will learn about the crops, and also the witnesses. That's right. So it's very name heavy. In fact, you'll find that some of these stories will tell you that the witnesses were also Black homesteaders. Now, just imagine reading a story like this in the Black Homesteaders of the South book. It's designed to inspire you to take that step to find your own ancestors. And we certainly had a process by going to the Bureau of Land Management, putting in the name of a potential homesteader, and then if that name did come up, we would see the land patent. Now, the land patent represented the end of the process. But what we are doing in this book is we're taking you to the beginning of the process. The beginning of the process when that individual made a decision that they would own land. So let me take you through a few stories that you will find in this book. By the way, the largest number of stories in this book come from Louisiana. The next largest number is from Mississippi. You will also find a listing of untold stories from Florida, because two of the Florida researchers went that extra step to find other people, other Black people that own land. So let me start off with Alabama. In Alabama, we have a large number of land available for individuals. And what we have found is that these stories are just so unique and so precious. The first Alabama story I want to share with you was written by Marcia Green Lamar. And she wrote, I discovered the homestead land patent on ancestry.com. Remember, I said, if you find that patent, that's the end of the process. So what we're looking for is the beginning. And she said that she was researching her Bird and Moffett family history. And until that time, she had no idea how the Bird family had come into owning so much land. William Bird, her ancestor, was born enslaved in Leakesville, Mississippi on January 14, 1854. And he was one of 3 children. He went on to live in Mobile, Alabama. And in the 1880 census, his occupation is listed in the timber industry. Well, she goes on to explain what he did and how he found that land. How amazing it is to be able to see a story and to know that your ancestor owned that land. I mean, we're talking again about original documents. Now let's talk about Arkansas. We don't have the Little House on the Prairie story, but we do have Arkansas stories. And with hard work, the families in Arkansas managed to get land. So here's another story. This is an Arkansas story. And it's about Levi Hampton. And this story is written by Jessica Trotter. She says that most of the records that she has found dates Levi Hampton back to 1835 in Alabama, and that she didn't know much about him. However, he was listed as a voter in the 1867 voter registration in Bradley County, Arkansas, and was the head of a large household. Now, I'm not going to go into every story, but what I want to encourage all of you to do is to look at this book, study this book, and let this book inspire you to find your Black homesteader. I want to thank Asala for sponsoring this book talk, and I want once again to encourage you to pick up a copy of the Black Homesteaders of the South. Thank you very much. And I look forward to answering your questions.
Hello and welcome. My name is Dan Berger. I am a historian and a professor and the author of the new book, Stayed on Freedom, The Long History of Black Power Through One Family's Journey, just published by Basic Books. Stayed on Freedom is a story of 6 decades of organizing for Black Power, from its origins in the civil rights movement to its persistent campaigns in support of workers, women, and oppressed people all over the world. The book tells the story of struggle from Mississippi to Philadelphia, Atlanta to Seattle, from Southern Africa to the Caribbean and the Middle East to Eastern Europe, from the 1960s to today. Stayed on Freedom is a history of Black power in the form of a biography. At the center of the global freedom fight told in this book are 2 longtime friends and even longer term organizers, Michael Simmons and Zahara Simmons. They've known each other since 1965, and I've known both of them for about 20 years. And now we've collaborated on this book. I'm fortunate to be joined by both of them today. And what I want to do in our brief time together is ask both of them to reflect on what it means to you to be stayed on freedom. So Zahara, let's start with you.
Thank you so much, Dan. I certainly didn't imagine that when I set out in 1962 to become a civil rights activist as a student at Spelman College, that I would still be working for, struggling for economic rights, civil rights, human rights for African Americans, but all oppressed people here in the US as well as around the world. I had no idea that this would become a lifetime of work. And I've been blessed by it in terms of the people I've met and worked with, what I've learned, how my consciousness has been expanded. So I'm truly blessed to have been, and still am trying to be, a long distance runner for peace, justice, and freedom for all.
How about you, Michael? What does it mean to be stayed on freedom?
Well, perhaps a little different than Zahara, in the sense that what I've done over my life is exactly what I've wanted to do, and that is to struggle along with and for the oppressed. And that I didn't have initially my focus was the African American community, and as I began to struggle and to look outside of the community, began to see that we joined a large number of people who were in similar situations, fighting for education, schools, quality, and just the right to exist. So that to that degree, I am proud to have been a part of that struggle, modestly so in terms of my role in it, but nevertheless able to engage in it. Along the way, I've met so many fascinating people from so many different cultural experiences, and that has just enhanced me as a human being. And so that what I've done has been to engage in struggle, not struggle to help any particular person, but struggle to push humanity forward, not to sound too grandiose. And so that I'm honored that this book has been written to reflect that. And I really hope it inspires others as they sort out what they're going to do with their life.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you what do you hope people will take from this book? Michael, why don't you start this time?
I really hope that people see that there's always something that you can do. That I always tell people tend to look at the struggle for human rights as a career or as a occupational choice, along with being an attorney or being something else. And I tell people, whatever you're doing, you can struggle for human rights. So that that is built in to any occupation, that is built in to any life. And if there's anything that I hope people glean from it, it is that point, that the struggle involves all of us.
I am also, even though I was not overjoyed when you initially put this idea forward, Dan Berger, to write this book, because I said, nobody's interested in us unknown, grassroots organizers. And, Dan, you said, I think they would be. And I didn't see it initially, but I am very pleased that you have used Michael's and my life's work and contextualized it within the greater struggle for justice that humanity is engaged in around the world. And so I am very hopeful that the younger organizers coming behind us will learn something about what it means to be engaged in the struggle for justice, and that it is a lifetime commitment. I learned that when I was in Laurel, Mississippi, having gone there in '64 for the summer, I thought. I went there thinking, oh, I'm going to work here for the summer as a Freedom School teacher, and then I'm going to get on with my life. And so, here it is, 2023, and I, am still on the battlefield, as they would say, for freedom, justice, and having seen people struggling for their rights all over the world, I know that it is a fraternity, sorority of people. We are united in love for humanity, for justice, for freedom. And I hope that that comes through in this book.
Thank you both. I wanted to close just with a brief reading from the introduction to the book, Stayed on Freedom. Freedom beckons, its ideal calls us forth, pulling at the heart, tugging after the mind. Freedom is not given, not legislated. It is taken, desired, pursued, studied, and learned. It is practice. Its makers are workers and students, farmers and prisoners. This story focuses on two partisans of the Black struggle for freedom. Their stories are unique, yet the world-making talents of otherwise unknown people could be gleaned through the stories of countless others who, dissatisfied with injustice and alive to the possibility of freedom, chose to act and learn and keep acting still. And in doing so, they choose love. Thank you so much for hearing us talk about Stayed on Freedom. And you can find out more about the book on my website, www.danberger.info.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Charlene Hampton Holloway, and I'm a retired African-American registered nurse specializing in civil rights. I marched peacefully beginning in 1961 in the American Civil Rights Freedom Nonviolent Peaceful Marches at age 13 years of age, when I was jailed for social changes. I've spoken at numerous times for various organizations, including young Black women, children, as well as adults of various cultures at schools, churches, libraries, Bellarmine University, University of Louisville, where my African-American U.S. soldier, World War II veteran dad, was one of the first Blacks to enter University of Louisville when it integrated in 1951. And I decided to, while my mother was living, to ask her if I could write her historical Whitlock story, because my mother was the first Black born in Kentucky here in Louisville to graduate during the Great Depression from before World War II from Indiana University's world-renowned Jacobs School of Music in 1939. My mother's history is so historical, and the Whitlock descendants that I decided to look up through the Filson Historical Society here in Louisville at 1310 South 3rd Street here in Louisville, Kentucky. There I found my, on microfilm, my maternal grandfather, owned biracial father. My grandfather was the first Black florist to establish his business in Kentucky and in Louisville in 1923, 100 years ago. And when I was a 12-year-old Girl Scout in 1959, I asked him to teach me to design flowers like him, but he stated, only if you write down your ancestors, then you know why you're going and which direction you're going in your lifetime. And at 57 years of age, I actually found his own biracial father's death certificate on microfilm inside the Filson, which had my grandfather's born a slave grandmother's name, Cornelia Wallace. This story is unusual. I've been told that I have an unusual memory. It's simply because 3 years, when my late mother, Charles Thelma Whitlock Hampton, on the front cover in the black and white picture, when she was 90 years old, I asked her to ride to Christian County, Kentucky, one of our 120 counties in Kentucky, where her father was born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And I was there for a small book signing when I did not know that Jack Glazier, who's now retired as a professor at Oberlin College, was going to write in his book about the struggles of African Americans, about me, my being there for my book signing. And even Caucasian Whitlock descendants wouldn't even talk to me. They just bought a book. But before I went to the Pennyroyal Air Museum for a book signing, I asked my mom, would you like to go into the Christian County Library with me? And And I'm going to see if there's any information on Granddaddy's Caucasian grandfather, the slave owner, Dr. John C. Whitlock. In a bound book, I found the 1884 Chicago, Illinois, Louisville, Kentucky published article that stated my great-great-grandfather, the slave owner, actually came in 1840 to Louisville, Kentucky from Trigg County, Kentucky, and enrolled January the 1st, 1840 into University of Louisville's medical school and graduated in 2 years in 1842. My story is so unusual that when I was asked by and sent a letter in September for the September 17, 2016 Smithsonian National African American Museum founder, Lonnie Bunch III, he asked me to come for the preview and reception. The Washington Post took our pictures and I asked them to use my own phone camera, which they did. And they took Lonnie Bunch III and my picture together. Then I went upstairs and saw the display of Homer G. Phillips School of Nursing, where my maternal aunt on the front cover, my only maternal aunt, was a graduate of the once famous Homer G. Phillips School of Nursing in St. Louis, Missouri. She had to leave Kentucky to be an RN, just like the first Black RN in Kentucky, Mary Merritt, who had to go to Washington, D.C. to enroll in Freedman's College connected to Howard University, the HBCU, where my late brother, an attorney who graduated from American University School of Law in 1973, he actually taught a business law class at the HBCU Howard University School of Law. I am so excited about this opportunity to be recorded by ASALA, of which I am a member. I'm giving a shout out right now to all the young writers, women writers who are published musicians, who are artists, published and paid for your beautiful artwork, to join our National League of American Pen Women organization that's on 17th Street in Washington, D.C. And it has a lot of history. I'm part of their history. My copy of my book is at their library. And this coming February the 11th, I will be driving again to the capital, to Frankfort, Kentucky, where I will be helping to teach about other people about the use of libraries to research their family history. I'm a member of the Kentucky Historical Society. I'm a member of the Louisville Filson Historical Society that reaches into the Ohio Valley area, which includes Tennessee, Kentucky, and those tri-states. But I'm part of the passionate that's coming up at the Filson Historical Society, where a lot of my documents will be on display, just like this past day, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, Emma Bryan, the curator, placed on the Instagram a picture of the actual March 5th, 1964 Courier Journal, Louisville Times, with close-up pictures of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who brought my late daddy's favorite baseball player, Jackie Robinson. I was there March the 5th, 1964. I was 16, junior at Louisville Male High School. I am the Louisville Male High School Hall of Fame. And this is a great read. And you can purchase my book on the website of Dorrance Publishing Company, DORRANCE publishing.com. The title is Whitlock's Compositions. Both my daughters are graduates of 1992 of University of Louisville, Rebecca and Benita Holloway, Benita Holloway Ham, Rebecca Holloway Hogan. They are the first editors for my copyright. And they actually graduated 150 years after my slave-owning great-great-grandfather, Dr. John C. Whitlock. To be able to trace my family's history of education is just amazing. And people look at me, and I've been asked to put my book back into print, which I did, and also allow it to be made into a play. I have the script in front of me, and also is titled Whitlock's Compositions, and it's a musical educational stage play. And also I've been asked if I will allow someone willing who appreciates education to contact me on my email at choll88317@aol.com to pay me for the rights to film this into my book, Whitlock's Compositions, into a major movie. So I'm hoping that someone who has in New York, maybe preferably the New York Academy Award winning Spike Lee, who has filmed a copyrighted story called Black Klansman, and also a Louisville native whose office is in Los Angeles, and his name is Bruce Romans, born here in Louisville. He also is in the Louisville Male High School Hall of Fame. He and my younger daughter, Benita Holloway, are both members of Louisville Male High School Hall of Fame. She was the only Black female who was inducted into the National Honor Society in her graduation in 1988 from Louisville Male High School. And in 2019, the year after I was inducted, she was inducted into Louisville Male High School of Fame. And today, I just got through being on placing on Facebook my granddaughter named Megan Charlene Ham, who's been now in the class of 2023 Louisville Leadership. So I am so proud of all of my offspring. I am proud of my children, my son, who's back in school at my alma mater, Jefferson Community College, studying electrician to be an electrician, while being at his 24th year at Reynolds Metals here in Louisville, founded in 1947, the year I was born. And all of their children and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren are so interested. They're all pictured in Whitlock's compositions. And for Barbara Boyd, who is our Louisville president and branch of ASALA, I'm grateful to her for mailing in my membership last year and asking me would I please pay the fee, the small fee, to be on this YouTube recording. So I'm very proud and I'm thankful for this opportunity today.
My name is Fredrick Williams. I'm a retired professor, adjunct professor from the University of Texas, San Antonio, where I taught a number of different courses, one being a course on the civil rights movement. And that created my interest in Mr. Bayard Rustin. I feel that Mr. Rustin has been cheated his position in our history for a number of reasons. Probably the most important reason, unfortunately, is that he was a homosexual. But Mr. Rustin was really the person that brought the whole concept of not the concept, not the philosophy of nonviolence, but the tactic on how to use it to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In January 1956, when the boycott was first beginning, or the protest was first beginning in Montgomery, Alabama, there was a tendency for our folks, we know a lot of whites were shooting at blacks and carrying on, and we had a tendency to do the same. Dr. King realized that is a battle we could not win. So they contacted Bayard Rustin through A. Philip Randolph in New York and asked Bayard if he would come down to Montgomery, Alabama and work with them on the correct way to use nonviolence. He went down there, I believe he got down there in February. He met with Dr. King, and what's very interesting is when he went to Dr. King's house, he walked in and Dr. King had a gun on the couch, and Bayard said, why do you have that gun? You can't use a gun in a nonviolent movement. And Dr. King said, well, they just blew up part of my house and I have to defend my family. And Bayard said, no. A commitment to nonviolence is a total commitment. And under no circumstances can you retaliate. And Dr. King got rid of the gun. And I think that's the first real lesson Dr. King had in how you use the philosophy as a tactic to get what your aim is. So at the end of the Montgomery bus boycott, when it appeared that they were going to win, Bayard told Dr. King, look, at the concept of nonviolence will work to desegregate the entire South. But what you need is a foundation under you to support your efforts. And so Dr. King told Bayard, go back to New York, draft up a blueprint of what you think this organization should look like. Bayard went back to New York along with Ella Baker. They drafted an organizational structure. Bayard took it back down to Atlanta, and when they met, King presented it to a large gathering of Southern ministers, and it became the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. But that whole blueprint, the whole idea of it was from Bayard Rustin. What's interesting, during the session when they were saying, okay, who's going to be president, who's going to be vice president, boom, 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 all these positions, they got to the executive director. Dr. King said, well, the logical executive director should be Bayard Rustin. Well, the other ministers just went bonkers. They went crazy. They said, hey, look, there's no way we can have a homosexual running a Christian organization. Dr. King was willing to make the battle for Bayard because, as far as he was concerned, he owed it to him because he had brought he had put the organization together for him, and he really was very instrumental in the whole nonviolent movement in Montgomery. Well, Bayard told King, he saw that all of a sudden he could be a distraction. And he said, no, never mind. I don't want the position. So Dr. King asked him to go back to New York and try to put some fundraising events for him in New York, which Bayard did. He put one they had at the Madison Square Garden. And plus he helped organize the first major speech that Dr. King made out of the South in Washington, DC, I believe 1957, and with his famous "Give Us the Vote" is when he first articulated that. So Bayard also works on raising money and keeping the Southern Christian Leadership Conference visible outside of the South and into the North. So the next big event, I believe, happened was with Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Jr. In 1960, King was going to organize a march on the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles, California, because he didn't feel the Democrats or the Republicans were doing enough to help desegregate the South, and especially bring the vote to Blacks in the South. Kennedy got to Powell and said, look, we can't have this disruption. We have to have a smooth convention. You are our top man in this field. Please do something to stop Dr. King from doing this. Dr. King was in Brazil at the time at a prayer meeting, and Powell called him and said, look, if you don't call off that march, I'm going to put out the word that you're having a homosexual affair with Bayard Rustin. And King called, after that, King called Bayard and said, look, this is what they're planning to do. He said, I don't want to call off the march. So what I'm going to have to do is pretty much disassociate myself from you because of the homosexual connection that they're trying to make between the two of us. That hurt Bayard. That hurt Bayard. And what King not only cut off his relationship with him, he removed him as being the voice for Southern Christian Leadership Conference in New York and in the North. That hurt Bayard a great deal. And in fact, a number of writers, James Baldwin, another, wrote how wrong that was for Martin to do that. Well, their disassociation lasted for 2 years, almost 3 years. In 1962, after Bayard gets back from India and England, A. Philip Randolph has him in his office and said, look, my march in 1942 was never complete because we got what we thought we wanted from President Roosevelt. He says, but I'm ready to do another march. And he says, I need your genius to be able to organize that march. And he says, I also need Dr. King because of who he is. So they had to rectify their differences, which they did do. And Bayard was the one that finally put the whole 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom together. And without Bayard's genius and organizational skills, that march never would have taken. We probably wouldn't have the I Have a Dream speech today. So that's why Bayard is important, because we as, I'm sure Dr. Carter G. Woodson would agree with me, we have to tell the truth, and we have to tell the whole truth and the way the truth goes. And I know they're getting ready to do they're going to do a biopic on Bayard. And they have some pretty good actors going to be in it. It's probably going to be very good, but the one problem I have with what I've heard about it is they're going to say that Bayard hid his homosexuality for the purposes of the civil rights movement. And that, I can guarantee you, that never happened. Bayard Rustin was, he acknowledged, he recognized early in life who he was. He was a homosexual and he was a Black man. And he knew he had both of those things were negatives in our society. And he took on the civil rights issue because he believed by winning civil rights for Blacks and other minorities, it would also win civil rights for everyone. It was not just civil rights, it was human rights. And so what we did to him in denying him his place in history is why I took on this project. I had the assistance of, it's interesting because you have one Black man who's not a homosexual, and then I had two white gay men, one Sterling Zinsmeyer, who financed the opera Fellows Traveler, that's been pretty successful, who worked with me. I did the writing and the research, but they just gave me some suggestions on how I should proceed with it. And I think it's an excellent book. I think it's a book that a historical society should want its members to read because it is our history. And I've always had the tendency to try to write about things that have been denied in our history books. For example, I did a novel called Fire's Agreement, Tulsa Riot of 1921. And I did that back in 2013 before everybody was on the bandwagon about Tulsa for its 100th anniversary. I did that because we needed that in our history. And so I did this because we need this truth in our history. We are about the truth, and that's what we should always be about. So I hope that this little talk that I've had with you all will encourage you to get the book, read it, and hopefully, I wrote it as a historical novel because I really do believe that a novel written the right way can be entertaining, but it can be educational and it can be empowering because it brings the truth to what happened and who we are. And I'll continue to write that way. I'm working on a new novel on Harlem Renaissance. And I don't think anything's been written on Harlem Renaissance since Wallace Thurman did his back in 1930. And I hope to have that out this summer. So I certainly thank the association for giving me this opportunity to talk to you all about what I think is a very, very, very important historical novel. It's, as I said, it's entertaining, educational, and empowering. Thank you very much for your time.
Hi, my name is Dr. Michelle Scott, and welcome to my book talk on Toba Time, Black Vaudeville and the Theater Owners Booking Association. My work is a collection of stories about a 1920s theater circuit that I argue served as the foundation for live Black entertainment in the 20th century. And I want to start first with some stories that open the text from the audience perspective of what it would be like to be at a Black vaudeville show. So you see here two sets of photos of performers in the 1930s. And I'm going to read you a quick excerpt of one of the impressions of Bessie Dudley, who you see here in the photo. Bessie Dudley was about 12 years old when she used to go to shows at Baltimore's Lincoln Theater. And she said, quote, "To me, they were wonderful. The dresses, the dancing, the singing, everything was there for her exploration. She could hear songs by Alberta Hunter or Bessie Smith. People sing of careless, careless love, or gee, but it's hard to love someone when that someone won't love you." And she used to ditch school with her friend, and they would sit there for hours on end in that theater, watching show after show after show, on one dime, by the way. And they never, quote, "went home to eat for dinner or nothing." They just looked. About 1,000 miles away in that same time period of the early 1920s, a young Leonard Reed, who you see here in the other photo in the top hat, was a butcher's seller or concession seller at his local theater, the Lincoln in Kansas City. And he used to actually, while he was selling cigarettes and candy, dance to kind of attract customers. And so he, quote, said he didn't know anything about that buck and that wing, but that Charleston, he had perfected that. And as he did the Charleston up and down the aisles, slowly, within about a period of 2 to 3 years, he moves from the audience member to an actual performer on the tabloid shows or the abbreviated musicals that fill the Toba stages. And he recalled that you could go see shows like Charleston Dandies or Hits and Bits, and that working class African Americans spent between $1 to $1.50 of their hard-earned income to sit and look and see themselves represented on the stage. Now, there was one circuit that drew both of these visions from these audience members together, and that circuit was called Toba. Toba, or the Theater Owners Booking Association, was a circuit of theaters that spanned the South, the Southeast, and Midwest between 1920 and 1931. It was a circuit of theaters that showcased Black performers for Black audiences, but it was controlled by an interracial set of managers, both Black, white, and predominantly Jewish immigrant. Now, vaudeville was actually one of the most popular forms of live entertainment in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And it really kind of served as a microcosm of performances of a newly urban, working class, and ethnically and racially diverse America. Now, the Toba circuit, which showcases Black performance, is familiar to popular culture scholars, historians, jazz and blues and music fans, and is mentioned in countless origins or entertainment biographies of folks like Alberta Hunter or Ethel Waters, Bessie Smith, dancers like Bill Bojangles Robinson, Clayton Pegleg Bates, or even musicians like Count Basie or Cap Calloway. They all honed their crafts on the circuit of the Toba stages before breaking into the recording industry or Broadway or film. Ultimately, Toba served as an essential vehicle for the promotion and transmission of professional live Black entertainment across much of the 1920s, except for the West Coast. Now, in this work that I've written both for academic audience as well as just the fan of musical theater, I kind of write from the intersections of Black business history, African-American entertainment history, and American popular culture studies to argue that despite people knowing or thinking they know a little bit about Toba, the negative depictions of white management exploiting Black labor was not the end of the story. And that I argue that the 10-year reign of Toba was an incredible feat of Black business skill, Black artistic talent, and a momentary feat of interracial cooperation that created a foundation for 20th century Black live entertainment, despite the rise of white supremacist conditions in 1920s America. Toba both empowered and hindered Black men and Black women entertainers and their entrepreneurial counterparts on and off stage. Now, the work was a historical treasure hunt to try to find Toba records. There are no one designated center for Toba business records. And so it was a search through the Library of Congress records, the Smithsonian American History Museum, Tennessee state records where the circuit is actually chartered, to collect all of these different stories from newspapers, this is a newspaper advertisement you see here, through theater playbills, city directories, census documentaries, ephemera like the button that shows the Dreamland Theater here in the lower corner, and films that showed Toba performers that had made it into on screen by the early 1930s. The work is a 6-chapter exploration of the entire circuit from the early intellectual conceptions of what a Black theater circuit should look like, all the way to its end in the 1930s. And so in this first section I mentioned here, Whistling Coons No More, Race Uplift and the Path to Toba, talks about the Black theater professionals in the 1910s and 20s who had a plan for an all-Black theater circuit even before it hit mainstream. So the photos that you see here is the main producer and director, kind of the archetype, or the leader rather, of Toba, S.H. Dudley, who was a minstrel performer before he decided to drop blackface and become involved in Black theater on his own terms. He is joined by other Black entrepreneurs throughout the Southeast and the Midwest, Charles Turpin, who you see here, Dudley again minus his blackface, John T. Gibson in Philadelphia, and interestingly enough, Mabel and Emma Griffin, who were artists on the vaudeville stage in the 1910s in Chicago and Washington, D.C. I chronicle their intellectual ideas for why they thought Black theater for Black people was an important enterprise to begin. And then I follow that up with looking at their white and immigrant counterparts in the second chapter, Hebrew, Negro, and Negro owners, interracial management. And there I traced how the 3 headquarters cities of what will become Toba, both in DC, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and in Chicago, were also being led by white entrepreneurs alongside some of these Black management figures that I mentioned in the previous chapter. Third chapter is all about the hard business of show business, looking at contracts, deciding how much Toba artists should be paid and how much commission they should be paid to the actual organization, and looking at the thriving Colored Actors Union that actually is created to kind of deal with some of the issues that management had placed upon Black artists at the time. The crux of the text, and the one that I think is the most fascinating for folks who are interested in jazz, blues, or musical theater, is chapter 4, The Multiple Meanings of Toba, or the Performer's Perspective. And there I look at performers both famous and obscure, from everyone like Cab Calloway, who graces the cover, to Peg Leg Bakes, who you see here in this photo, to a young Hattie McDaniel before she graced Hollywood stages in the 1930s, to the Nicholas brothers, and to our comedian duos, folks like Butterbeans and Susie, who were kind of the archetype of the Aunt Wanda and Fred Sanford dialectic or debate that happened when we see in Sanford and Son in the 1970s. And so in that particular chapter, I look at the challenges and the benefits of being a Toba Time performer. Everything from what it took to actually get an audition and become a part of the show, to the fact that you had to travel and live in segregated America to be on the Toba circuit. What it was like to actually have fame, and how that fame was actually debated back and forth by an elder generation of African Americans who thought that blues music and comedy and dance and all the things that Toba celebrated also had a devil's side to it. And so I talk about the detriments again and challenges, and to really kind of center what the circuit was like for the artists on stage. Last couple of sections talk about, if we're looking at Toba in a 360 model, what was it like for the communities where these Toba theaters existed? Toba had at its height 100 theaters across, again, the Southeast, South, and Midwest. And in each of those cities or towns, there had to be some place for these performers to eat, to dress, to sleep, And you have a host of hospitality and communication industries that supported the theater circuit. And there's a different way of looking at the agency that theater affords by looking at its partnerships in segregated communities. And here in this slide, you can kind of see an example of some of the ads for colored hotels or Black hotels, or theatrical costumes that would actually only cater to Black performers. Even before we think of something like the Green Book, there was a directory for theater artists so they would know where to and where not to travel when they were going from Chicago to St. Louis, into Dallas, into Houston. Where would they stay? How would they live and still make it to a show, sometimes 2 to 3 shows a night, every night, for up to 40 weeks on the circuit. This is just an example here of some of the railway travel, which is the predominant way that performers and troops, larger troops, traveled from city to city. In some cases, they were able to rent or lease cars for the entire troop so they could avoid segregated seating. But for the most part, Toba performers were part and parcel of the segregated system. And so they were riding on colored only cars, dealing with all of the humiliations that segregation had to offer, and still had to be able to hit the stage that night to perform to the best of their ability. The end of the text actually talks about how the circuit comes to an end, and it's coming to an end at the onset of the Great Depression, but also part and parcel of the decline of vaudeville itself due to the rise of silent film and later sound films. And so that kind of chronicles the different transitions that artists and entrepreneurs are making as they're moving from vaudeville to looking at performers on screen, on stage, and cabarets, and really kind of looks at the legacy of performers because in the circuit itself, because again, the circuit is something that lasted past its 1931 conclusion. I end with looking at some of the last physical reminders of the circuit in an epilogue. And Toba Time's legacy can be seen in 3 national theaters that are still standing. The Walker Theater in Indianapolis, Indiana, named after Madam C.J. Walker. The Howard Theater in Washington, D.C., which was one of the first theaters on the circuit in 1921. And the Douglas Theater in Macon, Georgia. These are some of the lasting physical legacies of the space of the circuit. But the circuit lives on in the stories and music and film and comedy renditions of the performers who graced Toba Time. Thank you for listening, and I hope you guys buy the book. Thanks.
Thank you for this opportunity to share a newly released book, Ukweli, Searching for Healing Truth. Ukweli is a Swahili word meaning truth. I'm honored to be among 47 South Carolina writers and poets who explore American racism. Joining me today is Herb Frazier, co-editor, a fellow native Charlestonian, and a friend for 16 years. If there's a North Star for me in our writing, it's about making meaning of the words of Dr. Martin Luther King. He said, "We may all have come over on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now." Again, he said, "We may have all come over on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now." Dr. King's reference to the reality of our interconnectedness and our interdependence has existed in our past. It lives with us in the present and has the capacity to shape our future together. We can recognize or deny it. In 2006, when I was interviewed by Herb as part of his beat for our local newspaper, I never imagined that more than a decade later that I would discover a story, a deeply personal story, of family history lost to time. Likely history not passed down to the shame and loss of social and economic status in the Charleston community. In 2018, after a DNA test revealed cousins of African descent, their ancestry research request led to a shocking and horrifying discovery. 3 generations of slave traders and auctioneers in my Charleston family from 1758 to 1859. They sold more than 10,000 Africans and local enslaved people here. The resulting research has morphed into our speaking to groups to share the truth about the findings of the largely unexplored domestic slave trade here and all that meant for the lives of the enslaved. To my esteemed solid colleagues, I became the accidental historian, now devoting most of my life to research, sharing the truth, and providing forums for white folks to gain confidence in taking the lead in racial healing. My belief is, while I can't change the past, I can change what people learn about it and what they do about it today. Now, Herb Frazier, co-editor of Ukweli, will take us through the genesis of Ukweli, its development process, and our aspirations for the book's impact on society.
Margaret, thank you for that introduction. And thank you for sharing in Ukweli your remarkable story. When the late Horace Mungeon and I asked poets and writers to join the Ukweli team, I knew your family story was an important addition to our work. In 2009, Horace conceived of an essay poetry series that was staged the following year at McLeod Plantation in Charleston. The event was held outdoors because of COVID restrictions. I was one of the 5 writers and poets Horace initially invited to participate in the event that he called Black History for White People Only. That title was a bit jarring for the folks at McLeod. Therefore, Horace renamed the series Ukweli, Searching for Healing Truth. It was Horace's belief if white Americans were better educated about the Black experience in America, they'd be more understanding and empathetic towards the reality of racism in America. The essay poetry series at McLeod was such a success that another former plantation site in Charleston, Middleton Place, asked Horace to bring one of the ukulele presentations to its property. When he told me that good news, I suggested that we recruit writers and poets to share their thoughts about the Black experience in America. And we should begin with the 5 presenters who joined him at McLeod. Soon, that list of 5 presenters at McLeod grew to 47 contributors who made possible Ukulele, Searching for Healing Truth, South Carolina Writers and Poets Examine American Racism. Ukulele is the Swahili word for truth. Ukulele is the truth of the Black experience in America. In Ukulele, we cover the history of oppression and its connection to today's brutal policing tactics. We remember the significant contributions of Black women before and after emancipation and during Reconstruction. We celebrate our ancestors' music traditions in Lowcountry, South Carolina, where we call the African influences Gullah culture. We remember the moment of Jubilee at the dawn of freedom. But when freedom came, the violence of Jim Crow and lynchings turned against the promise that all men are created equal. Once we fought for school desegregation, now we look inward to educate our own in our own way. We celebrate Black land and the struggle to keep it. We ask the question, how do we as a people break the status quo and bind the emotional wounds that slavery left behind? We talk of a joined community to uplift the spirit, mind, and body, while renewing our African ties. We remind readers that Black people have a place in nature and a voice in who should tell our stories. That's Ukulele. Horace Mungeon passed away before Ukulele was released in February 2022 by Evening Post Books. I would like to remember Horace by reading his bio and one of his poems to you. Born in Hollywood, South Carolina, Horace Mungeon moved with his family to New York in 1946, where he attended public schools and majored in English at Fordham University. He served 3 years in the U.S. Army and was a member of the 82nd Airborne Division. In 1989, Horace and his wife Gussie, also from South Carolina, moved to Ridgeville near Charleston. He started writing poetry in the mid-60s during the genesis of the Black arts movement. In 2017, the National Museum for African American History and Culture included a video of the Black Forum magazine, which Horace founded in 1970. His magazine is a permanent part of the museum's statement of the Black arts movement. In keeping with the format of Ukulele, one of Horace's poems was paired with an essay in the book by Millicent Brown. Millicent was one of 11 students in 1963 to enter all-white public schools in Charleston. In her essay, Millicent discusses her experiences as a first child of school desegregation and how the goals of desegregation led to unintended consequences that affected Black communities today. Millicent's essay is paired with Horace's poem, In the Spirit of the Movement. I'm going to read Horace's poem. The assassination of President John Kennedy on November 22nd elevated the tone for the turmoil yet to come in the young decade of the 60s. From the activism for racial justice gathering steam from the Montgomery bus boycott of the 1950s, taking the tenant to the realm where the truly unimaginable could be entertained. The activism of the 60s started with 4 college students took a stand against segregation in Greensboro, North Carolina, when they refused to leave a Woolworth's lunch counter without being served. Over the next several days, hundreds of people joined their cause in what became known as the Greensboro sit-ins. Governor George Wallace's 1962 campaign promise to defend segregation at all costs. He stood in the schoolhouse door where he declared segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. The white knights of resistance were forming. Martin Luther King Jr. became a shining icon of hope for the future. Negroes around the country were organizing to combat local issues, unemployment, school segregation, low wages, Jim Crow codes, voter participation. From Birmingham, Alabama to Jackson, Mississippi, to Albany, Georgia, to Charleston, South Carolina, there hung above the Negro community a halo of hope through activism. The spirit of the movement was palpable everywhere throughout the land. Negroes, young and old, were activisms like a suit of armor. The storm of change was amassing all over the South, an avalanche of amendments to address the grievances of activists came to the form of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and the Equal Rights Commission. The national spirit of the movement infused local actions. There were many individual acts of bravery and sacrifice. On the local level, that carried national implications and brought real change to substantive the meaning and the motto of the civil rights movement, we shall overcome. Just as Horace's essay poetry series at McLeod led to this book, Ukwele, it has also inspired another book in which Margaret will tell her remarkable story of her ancestors who sold people of African descent. But first, Margaret, let's talk about McLeod Plantation, because you have a very interesting connection with McLeod.
I do. It's a matter of life coming full circle. I was born adjacent to McLeod Plantation in 1952. And as a child, the slave quarters were still occupied by descendants of the enslaved people. And I can remember seeing the children out there in the dirt road right in front of their cabins, playing in the dirt. And they were also getting water from a brick cistern in the center of the road using a hand pump to get their water. And they had no electricity. And I can remember asking my mother, why are those people so poor? Because we were living in the country club of Charleston that had a swimming pool, tennis courts, a marina, a golf course. And here were people next door to us living that way. And my mother's only answer was, Margaret, that's just the way it is. Even as a young kid, I realized that was wrong. And I've spent my life trying to advocate for African Americans in this community. And what has just been so amazing is to be a part of Ukwele, because the book launch last February was actually held at McLeod Plantation. So I was able to read parts of my essay from that. So I feel like in the book that's going to be coming out next year, that my goal is to go to predominantly white audiences and help them understand and hear the whole truth of what happened, so that they can develop empathy and so that they literally can take the first steps. So what I'd like to do to close this out is read a poem that is paired with my essay in Ukwele, and it's by a retired attorney, Jim Brailsford. And Jim is a direct descendant of General William Moultrie, who was fought in Charleston in the Revolutionary War. So he has much deeper roots than I have. His poem is called Deliver Us. Deliver us from questioning why we believed in witches, why we followed teachers, why we burned young girls in the zeal of our faith and the whimper of our stupidity. Deliver us, for it is too late to save them, too late to redeem ourselves, from questioning why we chained another people for our profit and comfort, under the stamp of our righteousness, blotted by our rapacity. Deliver us, for it is too late to save them, too late to make amends. From questioning why we dislodged the ancients from the swamps and the plains and the mountains that they knew how to love far better than we, while we defrauded them and killed them in the name of this just and great nation. The name and the justice and the greatness besmirched our own cupidity. Deliver us, for it is too late to save them, too late to forgive ourselves. From questioning why we went to war against ourselves, following leaders, killing our own, leaving 600,000 dead. For honor and principle and in the sin of our pride, deliver us, for it is now too late to save them, too late to retrieve the squandered spirit of the nation. But as there is still time to come, so may there be deliverance tomorrow. May we screw up our courage and ask our questions now. May we demand our answers now, and hearing none, may we give the answers that we know to be true. And do that which we know must be done, while it is not yet too late to save us all, while there is still time to save ourselves and to save this paradisic planet. Thank you, and we really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you from Charleston, South Carolina today.
Thank you very much.